I'm going to talk to you about the mind, about your mind, and what you think your mind is like. I'd be interested to know if it's what I'm experiencing at the moment. I feel like I'm thinking very differently to how I used to think, and I'm wondering if that's usual or if there's something going on or what, I don't know. So, when we think about the mind, in our culture we've kind of accepted that we've perhaps got an unconscious mind and we've perhaps got one that we're conscious of, and one that's probably in the middle, a different level. Freud, who is a really kind of influential figure in psychology, who was around the 1900s, he's the guy who suggested that mental disorders could be treated. Before that, they thought that people really couldn't be treated as well, that they were stuck with the disorder that they had. Ancient times believed that mental disorders were caused by possession of evil spirits, and that in order to get rid of that evil spirit out of you, you either had trepanning, or trepanning, I'm not really sure how you pronounce it, where they cut a hole in your skull and they let the evil spirit out. They found bones that have got holes in their skull, and they believe that was the reason why they had those holes in there. Or that when history changed and there was influence of the church, particularly Catholicism in England, before Henry VIII and the Reformation and all that kind of era. Before them, that exorcisms were the way to get these the devils, the evil spirits, had now become the devil, and trying to get that out of a person. And then it kind of moved towards asylums, kind of moved towards people having mental disorders. That you couldn't be treated. They treated them like animals. They used to pay a penny and go and put the lunatics for fun, because they were chained up, and they'd probably scream at you or whatever. So Freud kind of came along and was like, actually, it's a normal person. They've just their mind is just not functioning as it should, and that with using talking therapy and dream analysis and hypnosis and things like that, that you bring that unconscious stuff conscious, and then in a cathartic way you'd be cured. So because of Freud, we've got this understanding of having an unconscious mind. Now, I wonder about this, and I think, do I feel like I have an unconscious mind because I've been told that I have one? Because, Freud's theories of the mind in terms of having an unconscious are very difficult to test, very difficult to falsify. You can't really hypothesis test them because you can't access the unconscious mind, and you can't, it's not operationalised, but you can't measure it. So how can you try and test it and prove it to be false? And therefore, if it withstands that testing, that it's true, you can't really do that. So it's not very scientific in terms of its theory. But, in our own personal experience, it seems like we do have an unconscious mind. So it's kind of like, do we really? Freud suggested that you have like an id, which is the part of your personality. So this is the theory of the personality that you're born with, and it's kind of like, we call it like a bundle of id. It wants immediate gratification all the time. It's where all the bad stuff about you is in your unconscious mind. So all your kind of violent motives, your sexual desires, so your Thanatos drive, which is the death drive, your Eros drive, which is the love drive, all that kind of stuff's in the unconscious mind as part of id. And then your ego starts to develop as you get a little bit older, so you start to kind of interface with the real world and kind of understanding that although you might have these kind of desires, you can't fulfill them, and you have to kind of navigate around the real world. And then when you've gone through the Oedipus or Electra complex, if you're interested in that, Google it. It's a bit of a strange theory. It is based on the myth of Oedipus Rex. The myth of Oedipus, but written in the text of Oedipus Rex, where little boys are supposed to unconsciously sexually desire their mother for want of unification, as it was in the womb. So it's not as like weird as it sounds. But anyway, the fake castration from the father from finding out and all that kind of stuff. It's a bit weird. You should read about it. But that kind of, at the resolving of that, going through that, you're supposed to develop your superego, and your superego is the part of your personality that will make you feel, it's like the internalisation of the morals from your parents. If you have quite a strict parent, you might become quite neurotic as an adult. If you have quite a lenient parent who's not very strict, then you might have a quite addictive personality. So, the idea is that those kind of parts of your personality can exist. And again, I feel like I'm experiencing that at the moment from what's going on. I'll give examples later, but I'm thinking, am I thinking those things because that's been put in my head, and I have that mental concept, so I'm putting the stuff that I know towards that mental concept, or is that actually what's happening? There's been some new research, not new research, I don't know what I'm talking about, newer research, 1968 by Sperry, investigated the brain, and basically people that have epilepsy, where they've got electrical bursts of electrical bursts of energy, electrical impulses, bursts of electrical activity in the brain, that's it. Too much of it makes them convulse and seize, have fits, physically. So when when medication isn't working, it's kind of, it's very, very severe. They don't have any quality of life because they're just seizing all the time. A drastic procedure that can be done is to split the brain. So what they do is they split the corpus callosum. So if you think of your brain, so if I put my head down here, and you've got your two hemispheres, so you've got left hemisphere on the left side, you've got the right hemisphere on the right side. In the middle, the thing, there's a wide flat band of nerve fibres which connect the two hemispheres together, and everything in the right hemisphere that gets communicated to the left goes through this band of nerves, and it's called the corpus callosum. Now, if you sever the connections in the corpus callosum, the two hemispheres can no longer communicate, but it does contain the epileptic seizure fit in one hemisphere of the brain, so the electrical activity is not crossing over to the other hemisphere. So what you end up having is what's called an absent seizure. So you're still kind of, having the seizure, and you can't really respond, but you're not seizing, so you're a bit safer. So as a drastic kind of surgery, they did that. Now, by doing that, what they realised was that the brain had what's called lateralisation of function, or so they thought, which is where one hemisphere of the brain is specialised to do one particular role or job, and the other is specialised to do a different kind of role or job. Now, what they found was that when participants fixated on a cross on the middle of a screen, and the reason they did that is because basically in each eye you have a left visual field and a right visual field. So anything that's perceived in your left visual field is processed by the right hemisphere. Anything that's perceived in your right visual field is processed by your left hemisphere. So there's a lot of crossing over that goes on. Now, if you move your eyes around, the visual information is going to be processed by both hemispheres. I mean, it is anyway, because you don't have a split brain, but if you had a split brain, then it would get cross over anyway. But by fixating on a point, they could manipulate it so that the information in the left visual field was only being processed by the right hemisphere and vice versa. And by doing that, they could investigate what the different roles of the hemispheres were. So, for example, if they displayed a symbol of a question mark in the left visual field, it was processed by the right hemisphere, and it was flash 1/10 of a second, very quick. Didn't allow the visual fields the eyes to move and the visual fields to kind of cross over and get processed by both hemispheres, or just by one hemisphere. So they asked the participant, "What did you see?" And they said, "I didn't see anything." And they were like, "Right." So they was like, "Right, here's a pen in your left hand. Bearing in mind that the left hand is controlled by the right hemisphere. Can you draw it?" Well, I didn't see it. "Just close your eyes and draw it." And they drew the question mark. So it was like they weren't aware consciously that they'd seen it, but when the left hand could draw it. And the explanation for that was that they did another experiment where they flashed a dollar sign to the right visual field, and they asked them could they say that, and they could say what that was, because that was processed by the left hemisphere. And what they understood was that in the left hemisphere are language areas such as Broca's and Wernicke's. So Broca's area is for speech production and Wernicke's is for speech comprehension. Broca's area being near the motor cortex and Wernicke's being near the auditory cortex. And they found that, your left hemisphere is for language and for things like logic and maths and sciencey kind of things. Right hemisphere is more for kind of symbols and pictures. It doesn't have any language areas in there, can't communicate. Now, obviously, this is only if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, it's very different. It's either on the opposite side of the brain, or language areas could be in both sides. And although new research has found that actually it's more of an integrated system, and because we don't have our corpus callosum severed, you know, you need both sides of the brain to be able to understand the language. So for example, the actual language themselves would be in Broca's and Wernicke's area, which are usually in the left side if you're right-handed, but you need to understand the intonation of words as well, so that might be in the right side of the hemisphere, right side of the brain, the right hemisphere. So you need both to be able to, you know, actually do the task and understand language. But my point here is that you consciously know something, like you didn't see it, but yet unconsciously you can draw a question mark. Now that means that there's lots of information going into your brain that you might not be aware of, because that split brain experiment just is an insight into how you can have things going into your brain that you don't know about, but they're actually in there and can actually respond. So who, you know, in terms of the split brain patients, the left hemisphere is what you're conscious of, that's who you are as a person, that's your self, that's your I, that's where you're located. But in your right hemisphere is the unconscious part of you. Now, is that actually you? Because you didn't know that was going on. So is that you if you don't even know about it? I mean, examples of things going into your mind that you don't realise. I mean, if you watched Derren Brown's show, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but they were sat in like an auditorium, like theatre, like old style theatre, and he had been throughout the whole show kind of like inserting different bits of information into everybody in the audience's mind. And the very last thing that he did was the big reveal, and he was doing something with a newspaper, and I can't quite remember exactly what it was, but they had all been primed with these certain words, so everything had gone into the unconscious mind that they didn't know about. But when it came to this task that they were doing, it was, you know, they were all aware of it. It was bizarre, and I wish I could remember it fully now. But other examples of this happening are, they've done experiments where they've recruited participants, and they've said to participants, just read this article, and then you're going to walk down the corridor and sign into the experiment, and do the experiment when you get down there. Now, unbeknownst to them, the actual experiment was they'd read this passage, and this passage was either a description of somebody like old, like walking really slow or whatever, and the other group of participants had one that was like young and really fast and whatever. And when they'd finished reading the article and they walked down the corridor to sign in to where they thought the experiment was happening, the people that had read the article that was about young people and being quick and whatever actually walked faster in comparison to the people that had read the passages about old people and being slow. So they'd been psychologically primed to walk quicker based on what words they'd read. Now, that is so weird. It's so weird that the things that are around you are subliminally impacting on you and how you behave, and you don't even know it. And I give you an example of how this has happened to me recently, and I'm convinced that this is the reason why. I went for a run last night, and I ran so good, and I was like, why am I running so good? Like, my whole mentality of it has changed. Like, normally I'm quite lazy, and I'm like, oh, I'm breathing a bit heavy, or I'm a bit tired, and I don't push myself at all. Like, I could full on sprint for quite a bit, but I don't, because I just think, oh, I love it. And I'm just like, I take it easy, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm kind of running, and I'll push myself a little bit, and then I'm like, no, I'm tired, and I'll stop. But this time I've been like, proper like, I've not even been out of breath, but I've been pushing myself more, and I've been like, why have I been like that? And then I realised that I've been reading Bear Grylls' autobiography, and I'm reading at the moment about his SAS selection, and how basically it was so grueling and so intense, and kind of like how what he's describing is that it's not about physicality, and it's not about kind of how able you are physically, it's all mental, and it's all kind of like, you know, if you just push yourself, your body will respond, and it will do what you're asking it to do. You know, the body is an amazing thing, and it will do what you ask it to do. Like, it's not designed to give up and be tired and to stop. That's your mind that does that. And so this is kind of, you know, I ran faster because I'm reading about Bear Grylls. Like, how ridiculous is that? And then that kind of makes you think, you know, how is your behaviour being influenced by everything that you see on social media and things like that? Like, when you see negative things, like, is that actually making you unhappy? Like, is that having an impact on you subliminally? Is that making you behave in certain ways? So it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that things that are going on in your unconscious, you have no idea about, and you're responding to them and having feelings about them that you don't kind of realise that you are responding to. It's very strange. So, is that you if you you know, you don't know what it is that is in your mind. If you're interested in finding out about lateralisation of function and how it works, I just really remembered that I didn't say. There's a TED talk called The Divided Brain. It's got like a little animation to go along with it, so it's really good. If you're interested, I'd suggest watching that. Going back to having kind of unconscious thoughts and not realising that they're unconscious. I read a book called Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And the suggestion is that our beliefs that we have are actually already there, they already exist. And what we tend to do is we try and logicise them. We try and come up with reasons as to why we believe the things that we do. Because our brain likes cause and effect. Our left hemisphere loves cause and effect. It needs to know the answers to things. It needs to know why things happen. Why is it like that? Why is that happening? You know, if you're very driven to find answers in a way like that, you're probably, you know, more dominant in your left hemisphere. But as human beings, we've evolved like that anyway, you know. That allows us to predict future outcomes more successfully and therefore survive. So our brains are like that anyway. But the suggestion is that, you know, say for example you align yourself with either Labour or Conservative. I mean, in the book it was talking about American politics, and Democrats and Republicans don't really map well onto Labour and Conservative, so it's quite, as an English person who knows nothing about American politics, it's quite difficult for me to kind of like amalgamate that into my knowledge of English politics. But if you think of Labour and you think of Conservative, I mean, if you've read the manifestos in the last election, I read them cover to cover, and I made little kind of like comparison tables and stuff of which ones offered what things. And from that, you know, Conservatives are very kind of conventional, very traditional, very kind of capitalist, believing that if you work hard, you'll do well. They kind of ignore the fact that we're in a social structure and that social mobility is quite limited for certain groups of people. Due to limited opportunities. You know, when you think of Labour policies, they're more for social mobility, they're more for, you know, people work very, very hard, but they don't have social mobility. They can't get from working class into upper, you know, middle and upper classes, because it doesn't matter how hard you work, sometimes based on the cost of living, it makes no difference. You know, low wages, cost of living, they kind of, you know, there's a lot of people living on the breadline even though they work really, really hard. And it's because of the way that our society is structured. You know, it benefits people who are business orientated, which is great, but they don't work any harder than anybody else who works in other roles. You know, it kind of ignores that. Labour's very much kind of open mind out of the box kind of thinking now. Like openness to experiences, that kind of thing. I mean, I'm using the kind of things that were talked about in the book, so I'm not suggesting that these are my own kind of opinions on it. But the suggestion is that maybe you've got some kind of traits wired into you in terms of your kind of, you know, it's on a spectrum. So you could be very open to experiences and adventurous, or you could be very kind of like anxious about things like that. So you'd be somewhere on the scale. Now, if you're very anxious about change and things like that, you'd probably be more aligned to Conservative. Whereas if you were very open to new things and change, then you're probably more aligned to Labour. Now, sorry, I'm just thinking about the fact that I'm only talking about two political parties. Obviously there are other political parties, but they're the two frontrunners really. And if you actually read the manifestos, those are the two that actually consider, you know, wider problems. You know, if you take the Green Party, for example, very good at environmental policy, but when you actually look at their educational policy, it is crap. So, and this is why I'm talking about Conservative and Labour. But anyway, so obviously there's lots of other traits as well. I'm just giving one as an example. You'd have to read the book if you wanted it in a lot more kind of expressive detail. But the suggestion is that you kind of hardwire into it, and what your brain does is it goes, right, I've got this belief. So in our society, because, you know, when you have a belief in something, you have to kind of come up with the reasons why that you think it. Otherwise people take it as less credible and you know, you haven't really thought it through or whatever. In reality, the suggestion is, and they've done loads of experiments on it as well, like, you know, this isn't just theory, this is actual, you know, cognitive experiments that they've done. They've found that people have beliefs all the time that they intuit, that are naturally there, that are coming from the right hemisphere, that are unconscious things, that the left hemisphere goes, whoa, we've got this belief, come on now, let's come up with a theory for why we believe it. Let's convince everybody as to why we believe it. So it's like the brain is trying to find answers all the time, trying to figure out things. Like me giving you this vlog now, I'm trying to figure out, so it's my left hemisphere all the time, trying to figure out kind of what is going on. And this kind of splitting of the idea of our brains and our mind, not our brains, our minds, because let's face it, like the brain is the physicality of it, and yeah, it might have different functions in terms of the hemispheres and the different regions of the brain and stuff like that. But we're talking about the mind, we're talking about the software rather than the hardware. And you know, there's so many theories which believe in this kind of, you know, Freud's theories are like psychodynamic, and there's Jungian theory as well, which is that we've got archetypes in our personalities as well. So we've got kind of like, we've got our actual personality, and then we've got what's called the shadow. And the shadow is the denial of things. So, you know, say for example you are not a very nice person in certain situations, you'll put that in your shadow and you'll admit to everybody else that you're a nice person. So anything that's kind of like not socially desirable gets put in the shadow, gets denied, gets kind of cut off, and you believe that that's not part of your personality. And there's other kind of archetypes and stuff as well. You know, there's a book called The Chimp Paradox, which talks about kind of cognitively why the mind is split up. So for example, they believe that there's a chimp that's kind of like, you know, when you do something, you're like, why did I do that? Why did I say that? What was I thinking? That's your chimp. And that's almost like your id. It kind of matches up in that sense. And then you've got the kind of the human that's in the middle. So that's like your ego of Freud's theory. And then you've got the computer, which is different to Freud's theory, because the computer's got kind of like where your knowledge base is and all your information that you need and kind of standard responses and whatever, so that you don't have to take up as much processing time. So it's very much kind of influenced by the analogy of computers, because that's what a cognitive approach is kind of analogous with. So you've kind of got all these kind of models, these concepts that are suggesting that we have a split mind, that we don't have just one mind, we have different parts to the mind. And my worry is that because we've got all these mental concepts of the mind and it being split, that's what's making me think I have a split mind, that actually I don't, and that I am just whole and I'm whatever. But because the brain is so black and white and so like you have to be this or this, it can't really entertain that you could be two things at once. And at the moment that's what I'm experiencing. I've kind of almost like opened Pandora's box, and I'm like experiencing two things at the same time, two contradictory things. Like I have two emotions at the same time and two thoughts at the same time that are completely polar opposite. Like my thoughts are completely polarizing, and I'm kind of sat in the middle going, what do I actually think? Like, what is my actual opinion? Like, so I wonder if it's like my left hemisphere trying to logicize things that my right hemisphere already kind of has a belief in. And it's like I'm left with two perceptions of the information that's coming into me. It sounds weird. And then I've got kind of two perceptions of reality, and I'm trying to figure out which one is actually reality. Like, it's almost like, it's hard for me to think of an example because it happens and I'm like, that's weird, and then I kind of just like get on with my day or whatever. But I mean, like a really, really silly example might be when, I don't know, you've gone past somebody and they've kind of given you a funny look or whatever. And I've got kind of one perception is that they're really rude and they don't like me and they're not nice and they're not a nice person. And then the other perception is that they probably didn't even see you. They're probably not having a good day, you know, it's got nothing to do with you. So I've got these kind of two views, and depending on which view you take, very much alters your perception of what's going on and your reality of that situation and then how you respond to that. And it's kind of like I'm presented with these kind of conflicting things all the time, and I'm having to kind of figure out which one's right, because both can't be right. So why am I seeing both things? Like, why can I not interpret a situation correctly? Why have I got these kind of conflicting views of what it could be? And why am I having to choose one of them? Like, why is my brain doing that? Because it wasn't as pronounced as this before. Like, I've always been kind of a person that thinks of both sides and kind of thinks, well, what about this and whatever. Like, I'm quite good at doing that, but it's getting ridiculous now where it's happening, like, and it's even not just having two things, there's like conflicting things as well. Like, oh, it could be this, it could be that and whatever, and it's just too much. But then maybe that's not what's happening, because that's always happened. It's more this kind of polarisation. It's hard to explain. It's like I'll have an emotion and I'll feel the emotion, and I know it's logical, completely logical, and I'll be like, why am I feeling like that? It doesn't make logical sense as to why I'm feeling like that, but I am. And then my logical side is trying to figure out why I'm feeling like that and giving me kind of opinions on why I'm feeling like that. But then neither of them are correct. Neither of them are coming from a place that is the actual perception of what it's a factual reality, not even the perception, because the perception is skewed anyway, but of what is actually real. So I'm kind of like, I mean, it sounds like I have schizophrenia. I don't have a grip on what reality is. Like I've got a psychotic disorder or something. Like, am I suffering from a personality disorder? Is like that what's happening? Like, what is going on where I'm finding it really difficult to figure out what's real and what's not? Like, it's so bizarre, isn't it? Like, how you processing information can just be affected by these, like, yeah, there's just these two different ways of seeing the world and two different perceptions of things. It's almost like, you know, we talked about Jung before, about he suggests that you reject part of your personality that's not socially desirable, but that is you. Like, that's it. Obviously you said it's in your shadow, and then, you know, we're not accepting it. It's part of who we are. It's part of our whole personality. So then what we think of as ourselves is not actually correct, is it? Because we've got, maybe, for example, you think you're a really hard-working person. Well, you're probably lazy as well, but the brain can't accept that you can be both, so you've got to be one of them. One might be that you're very kind as a person, but actually you're probably quite selfish. In fact, if you're really kind to people, what that Jung says is that that's to cover up the fact that inherently you are very selfish, more selfish than anybody else. If you're very nice outwardly, it means that you're not very nice inside, which I find quite amusing, because I come across sometimes as not very nice, which means that inside I'm lovely. But yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? Like, that our brain can't cope with the fact that we could be both. We have to be one or the other. We have to reject part of ourselves, and is that healthy to do? I mean, I'm finding that, understanding that, because, so for example, I've always thought that I was an unselfish person. I'm always quite kind of generous with my time and with money and stuff like that. But actually, like, I've been discovering recently that I'm really selfish. And it's not selfish in a bad way that's disadvantage to other person. It's because I'm trying to preserve myself. And because I'm very independent and I haven't got anybody else to rely on, like, I'm on my own, you know, like, I mean, obviously I've still got my parents, and if worse comes to worse they'll bail me out, but I would never ask them anyway. Like, I'm too proud in that sense. So, like, I'm self-reliant, like, there's no one to help me out. And so, kind of, in order to preserve myself, I'm quite selfish, and I do think of myself a lot, and I'm in that kind of, you know, thought process of thinking of myself. And so what I've discovered is that that's part of my shadow. Like, I am actually quite selfish, not intentionally, but as an act of self-preservation I am. But yet outwardly I'm projecting to the world that I'm a kind person, because that's what society kind of deems to be acceptable. And so, you know, I am both, and that's part of my personality. So, but understanding that I'm a selfish person is having a detrimental effect on my personality. It's making me feel like I'm not a nice person, and that I shouldn't be like that. So it's almost like I'm becoming unhealthy, because I'm recognising what's in my shadow, I'm recognising what's part of my personality, and it's almost like all these years that I've loved myself and I've thought I've been amazing. The reason why I've thought like that and I've had such high self-esteem is because I've been ignoring all the parts of my personality that are not deemed to be acceptable. I've kind of hidden them. I've had all these defence mechanisms to get rid of them. And so it's kind of like really interesting to kind of discover that about myself. And it's a wonder, isn't it? Like, you know, all these people that have low self-esteem, is it because they've just been aware of all the stuff that's in their shadow? They know, like, all the parts of themselves that aren't particularly great. Like, I'm delusional. Like, I actually think I'm awesome. So there's obviously stuff about me that's not awesome. Like, the fact that other people respond to me in negative ways quite often suggests that there's parts of my personality which aren't nice and that people don't like. So it's just really kind of, I'm kind of having a kind of, what, quarter life crisis, bit less, maybe I'm midlife nearly, crisis, where I'm just like, what is going on? Like, why is my mind kind of opening itself now? Why is that happening? And is it actually, not all these mental concepts actually accurate? Like, is this real? is this, you know, the way I'm thinking about it, is it real? Or am I just kind of applying these mental concepts so that I understand what's going on? Maybe nothing's going on. Maybe I'm thinking stuff's going on when it's not. Maybe I'm looking too much into it. My left hemisphere is trying to figure stuff out, and actually there's nothing
like,
there.
Does your mind work like that? Like, does it kind of do that, or is it just me? And even kind of like Jungian theory that we were suggesting before, it's almost like if you have like an outward trait and then you have what's in your shadow, then that just means that everybody's going to be the same. Like, even if you're on that kind of spectrum, it's the spectrum of it is the part that's kind of seen, the part that's kind of in the shadow. So it's like you can't be one or the other. So then that means no one has a personality, and that everyone's kind of like just somewhere on that spectrum. So then that doesn't make any sense, does it? Because why are we not all the same when we've all kind of discovered that we've got this kind of shadow and this kind of no personality? Why don't we all just become the same? Or do we? The spiritual people, they're all quite similar, aren't they? They're all quite calm, they're all kind of, you know, gentle and whatever. Or are they? It's interesting that, isn't it? Is Jung actually right? He's, you know, the suggestion that we do have a split mind. Like, are we not a whole, as I was saying before? So, you know, what to believe, really.